Blink, The Power of Thinking Without Thinking by Malcolm Gladwell. Picture this, 1983, sunny California. A man strolls into the J. Paul Getty Museum, carrying what might be the deal of the century. He's got a marble statue, a kouros, as the ancient Greeks called it, of a young man. Now, there are only about 200 of these scattered around the entire world, and most look like they've been through a blender. But this beauty, nearly perfect. Almost 7 feet of flawless marble with this weird, almost supernatural glow. The price tag? A cool $10 million. Here's the thing about dropping $10 million on anything. You don't just hand over a check and call it a day. So the Getty went full detective mode. We're talking 14 months of investigation that would make CSI jealous. They brought in lawyers who traced this statue's family tree all the way back to the 1930s, through some fancy collection in Switzerland. They flew in geologists who spent 2 entire days squinting through high-powered microscopes like they were searching for the meaning of life. They even drilled into the poor statue's knee, yes, behind the kneecap, and ran every test known to science: mass spectrometry, X-ray diffraction, electron microprobes, probably a few they made up on the spot. The verdict from the science squad? Unanimous thumbs up. This marble came from an ancient quarry on the Greek island of Thasos. Better yet, it had this thin crust of calcite, a mineral that only forms after hundreds, maybe thousands of years of sitting around aging like fine wine. The statue was legit. The Getty popped the champagne, wrote the check, and in fall 1986 unveiled their prize to the world. But then, things got weird. The real experts, people who'd spent their entire lives obsessing over Greek sculpture, started showing up, and they didn't need 14 months or fancy equipment. They needed about as much time as it takes you to glance at your phone. This art historian, Federico Zeri, walks in and just stares at the fingernails. That's it. The fingernails. Something about them felt off in a way he couldn't even put into words. Just wrong. Then there's Evelyn Harrison. The curator's all excited, dramatically whips off the cloth covering the statue like he's unveiling the Mona Lisa, and announces, "It'll be ours in a couple of weeks." Her response? "I'm sorry to hear that." Ice cold. But the best reaction comes from Thomas Hoving, the former big boss at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The first word that popped into his head when he saw it? Fresh. Think about that. A supposedly 2,000-year-old statue looking fresh. He said it looked like someone had dunked it in a cafe latte that morning. In literally the blink of an eye, these folks knew something that an entire team of scientists with their million-dollar equipment couldn't figure out after a year of grinding work. And guess what? As time went on, their gut feelings turned out to be spot on. Those documents tracing the statue's history? Total forgeries. The style? A weird mashup of different eras that made no sense. That calcite layer everyone was so impressed by? Turns out you can fake it in a few months using, wait for it, potato mold. The magnificent $10 million kouros was about as authentic as a $3 bill. This wild story sits at the heart of Malcolm Gladwell's brilliant mind-bender of a book called Blink. Gladwell's got this gift for taking stories that sound completely made up and using them to blow the lid off how our brains actually work. And what Blink reveals is that there's this secret, incredibly powerful world of thinking happening inside your head that operates in the first 2 seconds of any experience. So buckle up, we're about to dive into that hidden world and explore the incredible power of thinking without thinking. By the time we're done, you'll realize that your gut feelings, those snap judgments you make, those first impressions, they're not just random emotional noise. They're actually your brain's supercomputer talking to you. And learning to listen to it, while also knowing when to hit the mute button, might be one of the most valuable skills you'll ever develop. So how is this even possible? How could a handful of art nerds, in one quick look, outsmart an army of scientists armed with equipment that probably cost more than your house? To crack this mystery, we need to meet a psychologist named John Gottman. For decades, this guy's been running what everyone affectionately calls the Love Lab. He brings married couples in, hooks them up to sensors measuring heart rate and sweat, romantic stuff, and then asks them to have a 15-minute chat about something they argue about. You know, the fun topics. Who should walk the dog? Where to spend the holidays? Why someone keeps leaving wet towels on the bed? Now think about that for a second. 15 minutes talking about household chores. How much could you possibly learn about a marriage from that? Most of us would say basically nothing. Marriage is complicated, right? Years of shared history, mountains of baggage, good days and terrible days. You'd think you'd need to follow a couple around for months, maybe years, to really understand their relationship. But Gottman proved that's completely wrong. By analyzing that 15-minute conversation, not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it, the tiny facial expressions that flash across their faces, the tone in their voices, he can predict with over 90% accuracy whether that couple will still be together 15 years from now. He's gotten so good at this that often just the first 3 minutes tells him everything he needs to know. What Gottman discovered is that every relationship has this hidden signature, like a fingerprint. Back in the old days of Morse code, they called it a fist. Every radio operator had their own unique rhythm to how they tapped out dots and dashes, which meant spies could identify who was sending a message just by the rhythm. Same deal with marriages. Every relationship has its own emotional rhythm that reveals itself whenever the couple interacts in a meaningful way. And Gottman realized he didn't need to analyze every tiny detail. He just needed to watch for a few key warning signs, what he calls the 4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse: defensiveness, stonewalling, criticism, and the absolute worst one, contempt. If he sees contempt, where one partner shows disgust or talks down to the other like they're superior, he knows that marriage is circling the drain. That one emotion basically tells him the whole story. This ability to find a pattern in something complicated, using just a tiny slice of experience, is what Gladwell calls thin slicing. And here's the cool part. It's not some rare superhero power. It's built into being human. Those art experts looking at the fake statue, they were thin slicing. They weren't sitting there consciously analyzing every detail like a checklist. Their brains, trained by years of staring at ancient Greek marble, did it automatically, in a flash. Their internal computer saw the statue, ran a lightning-fast comparison against every authentic statue they'd ever encountered, and sent back an error message. Something's very wrong here. Our minds operate on 2 totally different systems for making decisions. The first one we all know pretty well, the conscious, deliberate, analytical brain. This is the part that helps you work through a math problem or carefully weigh whether you should take that new job. It's logical, thorough, but man is it slow. This is the system the Getty used for those 14 months. But then there's this second system psychologists call the adaptive unconscious. Think of it as this massive supercomputer humming away in the background, constantly processing huge amounts of information, hunting for patterns, making judgments without you having any clue it's even working. This is what lets a firefighter walk into a burning building and suddenly feel that something's off moments before the floor collapses beneath where he's standing. It's what allows a basketball player to know where everyone is on the court without looking. Gladwell calls this kind of thinking fast and frugal. It uses the absolute minimum information to reach a conclusion in the blink of an eye. Want to see this hidden part of your brain in action? Imagine this card game scientists designed at the University of Iowa. 4 decks of cards sit in front of you. 2 red, 2 blue. Your job is simple. Flip cards from any deck and win as much money as possible. What you don't know is the game's rigged. The red decks are a trap. Big rewards that sucker you in, but also devastating losses that'll bankrupt you over time. The blue decks are the safe bet. Small but steady wins. Question is, how long does it take you to figure this out? Most people need about 50 cards before they start getting a hunch that blue might be better. By around the 80th card, they can actually explain why the red decks are a bad idea. That's your conscious mind, slowly learning the rules like a student studying for a test. But here's where it gets wild. The scientists hooked players up to machines measuring palm sweat, a physical sign of stress, and they discovered that players' hands started getting nervous around the red decks after only 10 cards. 10! That's 40 cards before they had any conscious hunch. Their bodies already knew. Their adaptive unconscious had cracked the code and was sending out warning signals. Stay away from those red cards. Even more amazing, players started picking more from the blue decks way before they could tell you why. They figured out the game before they knew they'd figured it out. This is the world of Blink. It's where our brains reach conclusions without giving us the memo. It sends messages through weird channels. Sweaty palms, that queasy feeling in your stomach, a sense of unease you can't quite explain. Which raises a pretty important question. If all this powerful thinking happens behind a locked door, how can we trust it? Should we even try? Which brings us to the dark side of thin slicing. Flashback to 1920. The Republican Party's hunting for a presidential candidate, and this guy named Harry Daugherty spots someone he thinks is perfect, Warren Harding. Harding was, by every account, ridiculously handsome. Strong jaw, thick black hair, deep voice that could narrate nature documentaries. He looked like someone had carved the ideal president out of marble. One person said he looked like a Roman senator. When Daugherty looked at him, he didn't see a small-town newspaper editor with average intelligence who loved poker and chasing women way more than politics. He saw a man who looked presidential. And he wasn't alone. America took one look at Harding and fell head over heels. He rode that distinguished appearance all the way to the White House. Then went on to become, according to most historians, one of the absolute worst presidents in American history. This is what Gladwell calls the Warren Harding error. It's what happens when our rapid thinking goes completely off the rails. Our internal computer is brilliant at spotting patterns, but it can be fooled by surface-level stuff. We see a tall, handsome guy, and our unconscious jumps to the conclusion that he must also be smart and competent. This snap judgment is so powerful it stops us from looking any deeper. It's the dark side of thin slicing, and it's behind so much of the prejudice and discrimination in our world. Take height, for example. Consciously, we'd all agree that how tall someone is has zero connection to their leadership ability, but the numbers tell a different story. In the general U.S. population, about 14.5% of men are 6 feet or taller. Among Fortune 500 CEOs, that jumps to 58%. Almost a third of them are 6'2" or taller, a height reached by less than 4% of American men. We've got this powerful, unconscious link between physical stature and leadership, and it's biasing our decisions in ways we don't even realize. To measure these hidden biases, psychologists created this fascinating tool called the implicit association test, the IAT. You can actually try it yourself online. The test is simple but profound. It measures how quickly we connect concepts. For example, in a race IAT, You might pair positive words like glorious or wonderful with pictures of white faces, and negative words like hurt or evil with pictures of black faces. Most people breeze through this part. Then the test flips the script. Now you have to pair positive words with black faces. And suddenly, for the vast majority of people, including more than half of African Americans who've taken the test, it gets harder. There's this tiny, almost invisible hesitation as your brain fights against a lifetime of cultural programming that links white with good. Gladwell, whose mother is Jamaican, admits his own test showed a, quote, moderate automatic preference for whites. Does this mean he's racist? Of course not. It means we operate on two levels. We have our conscious values, what we choose to believe and stand for. But we also have these unconscious associations, shaped by the culture we're swimming in. And these hidden attitudes can leak out and influence how we act in spontaneous situations, without us ever realizing it. This is exactly what happened in a brilliant study by law professor Ian Ayres. He sent trained buyers, white men, white women, black men, and black women, all dressed identically and acting the same, into 242 car dealerships around Chicago to negotiate for a car. The results were jaw-dropping. The initial offer given to white men averaged about $725 above the dealer's actual cost. For white women, it jumped to $935 above cost. For black women, $195 above cost. And for black men, a staggering $687 above cost. Even after 40 minutes of hard negotiating, the black men still ended up paying almost $800 more than what white men were offered right from the start. Were these car salesmen actively, consciously racist? Probably not. More likely, their adaptive unconscious made a snap judgment. They had this powerful, automatic association between women and minorities, and being a sucker, someone who'll pay whatever price you throw out first. That first impression, based on nothing but race and gender, was so strong it drowned out everything else, including clear evidence that these buyers were smart, educated professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. So if our snap judgments can be this powerful but also this dangerously flawed, what are we supposed to do? Just give up on first impressions? This is where Blink becomes truly game-changing. Gladwell argues we're not helpless. We can actually control and educate our instincts. Consider the world of professional orchestras. For centuries, the great orchestras were almost entirely white men. The common belief was that women simply couldn't play certain instruments, like the trombone or French horn, with the same power and emotion as men. And when auditions happened face-to-face, this belief always seemed to be confirmed. The men just sounded better. Case closed. But starting in the 70s and 80s, American orchestras began changing how they held auditions. They put up a screen so judges couldn't see who was playing. Musicians were identified only by a number. They even put down carpet so you couldn't hear the click of a woman's heels as she walked on stage. They created a moment of pure, unbiased listening. And what happened? A revolution. As soon as those screens went up, orchestras suddenly started hiring women left and right. The number of female musicians in top U.S. orchestras has increased 5 times over since blind auditions became standard. Turns out when judges looked at a woman, their Warren Harding error kicked into gear. They saw a smaller woman holding a big brass instrument, and their unconscious prejudice made it impossible to actually hear the music for what it was. As one musician put it, "I began to listen with my eyes, and there's no way your eyes don't affect your judgment. The only true way to listen is with your ears and your heart." By simply changing the context of that first impression, they fixed their flawed, thin slicing. This idea of creating structure for our instincts is one of the most powerful lessons in the whole book. Take the emergency room at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. Doctors there faced a constant stream of patients complaining of chest pain, and they had to make this crucial snap judgment. Is this person having a heart attack, or did they just eat too much pizza? This is incredibly difficult, and doctors were getting it wrong constantly. They were sending home people who were actually having heart attacks, and more often, admitting perfectly healthy people, which cost the hospital millions and tied up beds that actually sick patients needed. The problem was doctors were trying to juggle too much information. They looked at the patient's age, weight, smoking history, family history, and dozens of other factors. It felt responsible and thorough, but all that extra information was just creating confusion. Then this doctor, named Brendan Riley, introduced a radical new system based on an algorithm developed by cardiologist Lee Goldman. Goldman figured out that to predict a heart attack, you don't need someone's entire life story. You just need answers to a few simple questions: their ECG results, their blood pressure, and whether there's fluid in their lungs. That's it. 3 things. The hospital ran a competition: doctors' gut feelings versus the simple algorithm. The algorithm won by a landslide. It was way better at identifying patients who weren't having heart attacks, and it was safer, correctly identifying the most serious cases more than 95% of the time, far better than doctors had been doing flying solo. Just like the orchestra screen, the algorithm created structure. It protected doctors from getting distracted by irrelevant information. It taught them that sometimes, when making a good snap judgment, less is actually more. This principle got tested to the extreme in a massive war game the Pentagon ran called Millennium Challenge. The U.S. military, dubbed the Blue Team, got every advantage imaginable: mountains of intelligence, supercomputers, complex analytical tools to predict the enemy's every move. They were fighting the Red Team, a smaller, less equipped force representing a rogue commander in the Persian Gulf. Red Team was led by retired Marine General Paul Van Riper, a guy who believed war is inherently chaotic and unpredictable. He believed in intuition, in rapid cognition, in the power of those first 2 seconds. Blue Team was convinced they could lift the fog of war with information and technology. Van Riper believed the fog was here to stay. Blue Team commanders held endless meetings with charts and matrices to analyze every decision. Van Riper, by contrast, told his commanders his overall intent and then gave them total freedom to act on their own. He created structure for spontaneity. On day 2 of the war, Blue Team confidently sailed an aircraft carrier fleet into the Persian Gulf, absolutely certain they knew exactly what Red Team would do. But Van Riper did the unexpected. He unleashed a surprise swarm attack using a fleet of small boats and a barrage of cruise missiles. In minutes, he'd sunk 16 American ships, including the aircraft carrier. In a real war, 20,000 lives would have been lost. Blue Team, drowning in all their information and analysis, were paralyzed. They had so much data they couldn't think straight. Van Riper won, because he understood the power of fast and frugal thinking. He protected his team's ability to thin slice, while Blue Team suffocated under mountains of data. Of course, the Pentagon couldn't let this embarrassment stand. They stopped the game, magically refloated the sunken ships, and basically ordered Van Riper to follow a script guaranteeing a Blue Team victory. But the lesson was crystal clear. Overthinking a problem can be just as dangerous as not thinking at all. This brings us to one of the most tragic and powerful stories in the entire book, a story tying all these ideas together: the shooting of Amadou Diallo. Diallo was a 22-year-old immigrant from Guinea, living in the Bronx. One February night in 1999, He's standing outside his apartment building when 4 plainclothes cops in an unmarked car drive by. They see a young black man in a high-crime neighborhood late at night, and their thin slicing kicks into overdrive. They decide he looks suspicious. Mistake number 1. They back up the car, and 2 officers get out. Diallo, likely terrified and not fully understanding what's happening, runs back into the vestibule of his building. To the officers, this confirms their suspicion. He must be guilty of something. They chase him. Now their hearts are pounding, adrenaline flooding their systems. In high-stress situations like a chase, our bodies go into this state of extreme arousal. Heart rate can rocket past 175 beats per minute. And when that happens, strange things start happening to our minds. Our thinking becomes rigid and narrow. Our vision literally narrows. We suffer from what psychologists call temporary autism. We become mind-blind. We stop seeing people as people and start seeing them as objects. We lose the ability to read faces and intentions. Diallo reaches into his pocket to pull out his wallet. But in that dark vestibule, under extreme stress, with their thinking totally impaired, the officers don't see a wallet. In that split second, a wallet looks like a gun. One officer yells "gun" and opens fire. His partner, seeing him fire and stumbling backward, thinks he's been shot and opens fire too. The other 2 officers, hearing the shots, rush in and join the shooting. In seconds, they fire 41 shots, killing an innocent man reaching for his ID. What happened on Wheeler Avenue was a catastrophic failure of rapid cognition. It was a perfect storm of every danger of thin slicing rolled into one nightmare. The officers' initial judgment was clouded by the Warren Harding error of racial stereotyping. The situation then escalated into a high-speed, high-stress encounter, plunging them into temporary mind blindness. They had no white space, no time or distance to slow down and properly read what was actually happening. But does it have to be this way? Gladwell says absolutely not. He tells the story of another cop who confronted a 14-year-old boy pulling a gun from his waistband. It was a chrome .25 automatic with pearl grips. But this officer was experienced. He'd been through scenarios like this before. His training allowed him to slow the moment down in his mind. He watched the gun, but he also watched the boy's face, and what he saw was fear, not aggression. And he thought to himself, "I don't have to shoot yet." The boy dropped the gun. Nobody got hurt. That officer's expertise allowed him to use his thin slicing ability as a precision tool, not a blunt weapon. He was able to actually see what was in front of him. So what do we actually take away from all this? The message of Blink isn't that we should always trust our gut, and it's definitely not that we should ignore it completely. The message is that our snap judgments are both a gift and a potential disaster, and wisdom comes from understanding the difference. Our unconscious mind is this powerful, mysterious machine. It can see truths our conscious mind is completely blind to. It can find the simple, elegant pattern hidden in chaos and complexity. But it's also a product of our experiences, our culture, and our hidden biases. It makes mistakes. It can be thrown off by irrelevant surface details, and it can be hijacked by our emotions and stress. The Getty Museum's big failure wasn't that they used science. It was that they trusted it exclusively. They ignored the intuitive repulsion of the art experts, dismissing it as subjective nonsense. The orchestra's great success was realizing their eyes were deceiving their ears and finding a simple, brilliant way to separate the two. The most powerful lesson in this book, in my opinion, is that our instincts can be educated. We can train our unconscious. That expert firefighter who knew to get his crew out of the building didn't have psychic powers. He'd spent years in burning buildings, unconsciously building a mental catalog of the sights and sounds of fires until he could recognize a dangerous anomaly in a split second. The police officer who didn't shoot had been in so many tense situations he'd learned how to manage his own stress response, how to mentally slow time down and see what was really there. So what can we do in our own lives to make those first 2 seconds smarter? First, we need to respect the power of that first impression. Don't be so quick to dismiss a gut feeling. If you meet someone and feel instant unease, or walk into a situation and your internal alarm starts ringing, pay attention. Your adaptive unconscious is trying to tell you something. Your job is to listen, then use your conscious mind to figure out what the message means. Second, we must stay humble about where our snap judgments come from, especially when they involve other people. Acknowledge that you have a Warren Harding error. We all do. We're all influenced by stereotypes and prejudices we're not even aware of. The solution isn't pretending they don't exist. It's consciously working against them. If you're hiring someone, create your own orchestra screen. Decide what skills are actually critical for the job. Then find a way to test those skills blindly before you let yourself get swayed by the firm handshake and confident smile. And finally, learn to control your environment. Snap judgments are fragile. They're easily corrupted by stress, time pressure, and information overload. When facing a complex decision, don't try processing everything at once. Be frugal. Find the 1 or 2 factors that really matter, just like those Cook County doctors did. And if you find yourself in a stressful situation, the most important thing you can do is slow down. Create white space. Give that supercomputer in your head a moment to actually do its work properly. That was a summary of Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. We've explored some of the biggest ideas from the book today, but here's the honest truth. A summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you explore the territory yourself. The true magic of this book is in how Gladwell weaves his stories together, how a simple phrase or surprising detail can spark a completely new understanding in your own mind. This summary is meant to be a starting point, helping you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or made you think a little differently, grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning new facts. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see yourself and the world around you. You'll find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to keep exploring ideas from some of the most life-changing books ever written, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to make sure you don't miss our next deep dive into the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep growing together.